Welcome to Conversations with Shem. Our focus is to show how to put the human back into healthcare. You're about to watch an episode in the 6-week series where I interview doctors about the health crisis in America today.
Hi, everybody. Happy Sunday. This is Donna Coriel. I'm the creator of Conversations with Shem, and this is yet another installment of our weekly series that is happening for 6 straight weeks. So I'm very excited to have put this together. You could find the episodes on somidocs.com under the episode tab. And each week we have a different physician panel that's joining us. So for those of you that are watching from home, we would love for you to interact. If you could just let us know where you're from and how you think that we should put the human back into medicine. We will be sharing your comments, your questions, whatever it is that you want to share with the rest of the people watching as you post the comments in the comments section. As always, we've got 4 parts to the show. The first is Shem commentary, a soliloquy. The next is a panel that comes on and enriches the conversation. The next part is a Q&A with those of you in the audience that want to ask questions of both Shem and the physicians on the panel. And then we close it up with a reading from Shem's new book, Man's Fourth Best Hospital. All right, so without further ado, I am going to be welcoming Shem.
Thank you. It's great to be back. You know, during my internship at the House of God, there were so many of what I call these, hey, wait a second moments, something's wrong here, something unjust, that someone had to write about it, and I guess it had to be me. I'd never written a novel before, and I just jumped into it. It was cathartic at the start. It turns out it's a kind of a resistance novel, a resistance to an unjust system, in this case, the internship of a medical internship. I was roasted for this by Harvard, where I was on the faculty at that time, and the book was called Cynical, and of course worse, but cynical was something that, cynical and angry, and yeah, maybe that was the fuel for it all. But I went back at some point to see, was there any hope? Was there anything kind of more gentle and good about the House of God? And I'll just read you. I found some wonderful, surprising things. I didn't realize that I was actually doing this. This is from The Fat Man. I make them feel that they are still part of life, part of some grand, nutty schemes, instead of alone with their diseases. And this is Roy Besh, the narrator. What these patients wanted was what anyone wanted, the hand in their hand, the sense that their doctor could care. So even back then, when I was so worn out and pissed off, something came through about connection, and I'm going to talk about that today. I didn't do any publicity going out and talking about it for 2 years. And then I got a letter through the publisher that said, I am in a hospital for night shift in a VA hospital in Tulsa. And if it weren't for your book, I'd kill myself. And I said, oh, it just got me right in the gut. And from that time on, I went speaking about it. And I always did the same thing. I always really, for all these years, from 78 to now, the same damn thing, because it's here all the time. And that's first of all, to write about injustice, and then about staying human in medicine, the danger of isolation, and the healing power of good connection. What's good connection? Well, we know what it is. It's good connection is mutual connection. If it's not mutual, it ain't that good. And what's come along in my development, working with my wife, is what I would now call the relational model of healthy psychological growth, or the connection model. So let me just give you a quick example of that, because everything I try to do now is around putting relationship at the center, and connection at the center, not I at the center, I or you. So think about when say you're a doctor, you have to do a terrible thing in the afternoon, but you really don't want to do it. You're tired out, but you made a lunch date with a friend. If it's a good connection at the lunch, 5 good things happen to all of the participants, the 2 participants. And the 5 good things are: both leave with a sense of more energy or zest. 2, both leave with more value for the other person. Number 3, they both leave with more understanding of the other person. 4 is the most important for what I'm talking about: power. Both leave more empowered to do than when they came in, right? And 5 is, hey, let's have lunch again. So let's talk about power, because that's what really hurt us in the house of God. We had no power. Usually in these big hierarchies, power is seen as power over other people, right? But when you entered the lunch, you weren't powerful about going back and doing your thing. What happened is, neither one of you really may have felt very empowered, but in the good connecting, power arises in both of you, and you go there and you do what you couldn't do. So you didn't come in that way, but it just shows the power of connection in relationship, and also these ways that you then absolutely understand and see very clearly your friend. So those are the 5 good things. And in the sequel to The House of God, Man's Fourth Best Hospital, as was mentioned, which I'll read a little bit from at the end, there are 2 new laws. And one of them is connection comes first, right? Connection with patients. Connection, well, with everybody. Connection comes first. If a new patient comes in, say, if you don't connect, you're not going to hear anything, right? If you do connect, you're going to hear everything. So that's law number, I don't know what, 1 for Man's Fourth Best Hospital. Connection comes first. The second thing is, think of your own relationships now. Nobody always gets it right. We always screw it up. There are disconnections in any kind of conversation that's serious. The people who really make it through, including doctors and patients and husbands and wives, etc., are the ones who hold the relationship through the disconnection to a better connection, right? Even saying we're in a disconnect is a connecting word that will get. So what I'm saying is, in that, instead of the power for instance, Henry Kissinger is a powerful person. That's for crap right now. We don't need that kind of stuff. What we have is that power arises in a good connection, and a good connection is good medicine. A good connection in your work and in your life is good medicine.
All right.
And I see you here, and I think that's about all I have to say now.
Wonderful.
How about
Great
that?
timing. Great timing.
I'm
All right.
getting the hang of this after two.
Then without further ado, I'm going to be now welcoming the panel. All right, so Shem has stepped off the virtual stage, and I'm going to introduce the panelists who are here and have graciously agreed to come and enrich our discussion. So, in advance, thank you so much to all three of you. Let's introduce them one by one. So, the first is Dr. Jennifer Lincoln. She's a board certified OB gynecologist and attending physician, and she primarily works on labor and delivery as an OB hospitalist. Welcome.
Hi, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. You know, your Wi-Fi is a little off. I know that you mentioned that your camera, maybe it's just me, but you're pixelated a little bit, but I don't know if there's a way we could fix that.
My
Yeah,
tech
no
husband
worries.
is at
Okay.
work right now.
Oh, no worries.
Sorry.
All right. Well, we at least have you here and we can hear you, and you're just a little pixelated, so no problem. So
Okay.
welcome to the stage.
Hi.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Next, I'm going to be welcoming Dr. Sunny Smith. She is a clinical professor of medicine, of family medicine and public health at the UC San Diego School of Medicine, and the founder of Empowering Women Physicians podcast, Coaching and Retreats. Dr. Smith, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It is wonderful to be here. It's an honor.
Absolutely. Great. All right. And last but not least, is Dr. Mike Natter, who identifies himself as an artist, a patient, a humanist, and a doctor. He's a native of New York City, to which he attributes much of his initial creative influence. Mike, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Without further ado, I'm going to switch with Shem and step off the stage. There's a little bit of an echo when I introduced you, Mike. I don't know if it's from you, but I guess we'll just have to deal. I don't know if there's anything that we can help. All right, guys. Here's Shem.
Hi there, welcome all. I wish I were your age now. So you got a harder road to hoe here than I did, as hard as mine was. It's different, but it's hard. So it's open. It's open. You can talk about anything you want, anything I said, whatever. And our hope is we'll get to issues about staying human in medicine. That's it.
Well, I don't mind going first. I just want to say, of course, it's an honor and a privilege and a surprise, a beautiful surprise, Shem, to hear that the person who wrote House of God, right, that, as you say, was known for cynicism and was known for, being critical, that your voice speaks to the resistance of the system, but staying human in medicine and connecting. It's just, I think that many wouldn't presume that. And I think, as you said, this is very much needed these days, particularly these days. You could say in politics, you could say in medicine, you could say with COVID, you could say with social isolation, that just reminding us to see the physician as human beings. We too have thoughts and feelings. And yeah, sometimes we get cynical because we're pushed beyond our limits. But I think beginning to see the physician and the person behind the mask these days as a human being with their own family, their own body, their own lungs, their own heart, their own soul, I think that's part of what's missing from the production model of medicine these days. So it's a welcome to hear your voice come and say that at this time.
Well, I have to say that I was really surprised when I went back to see if there was anything that resembled humanity in the House of God. And as I said, I found two or three things that, and I felt very proud somehow that some little bit of that was still in me, still in me. And my journey since then um, has just been about that, thanks to my partner and wife, Janet Surrey, basically, who really is the mother that created this relational vision of what's healthy growth psychologically, which is much more acceptable in women's lives than men. But thank you very much. And I just feel we are at I thought it was bad way back then. We're at a crisis point in medicine. We've got to do something. And that's what I hope would come out of these discussions is, okay, what ideas do we have, et cetera. So it's bad, isn't it? I mean, is that the way people feel? And what's wrong?
Yeah, I hope you guys can hear me okay. Oh, sorry, I don't know if you can hear me okay. I'm sorry about my poor connection, but thank you guys so much for having me. I feel like this talk could not come at a better time. I don't know if you others here feel this way, but just in the past week, I feel like as a physician, to see how the public is treating us, to say that we are making this up, to say that things are not so bad, and to see people actively fighting against what we see as very basic things to keep us safe. It's an affront and it's a moral injury because it's other people saying that their inconveniences are worth more than our lives. And it's getting hard, Shem. We've been at this since March and I haven't missed a shift and I haven't had PPE and I've seen moms and babies separated, and it's getting harder when it should be getting easier as we know more. So when I initially came into this talk, I was like, yes, we need to talk about how as physicians, we need to connect. For me as an obstetrician, I want to make sure my patients feel that connection and feel empowered. And in the past 7 days, I feel like I am struggling because I feel like, we do what we do and it's crazy jobs, right? What we do is insane and we do it every day and we do it because we love it. And why do we do it? Because at least we know that we're helping people and we feel appreciated. And now that second part, I feel like has gone away almost. And now we're the bad guys. It's feeling really hard to not feel really angry every day in this country as a physician. So yeah, I feel like we need to talk about this for our own mental health. I mean, we're all seeing people struggle. It's really hard.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing that that this is going on. I'm not on the front lines anymore, except I got COVID, so that was yeah. I was out. I was I was doing publicity for Man's Fourth Best Hospital in New York, and went to the first week in March.
You were a trendsetter. Jeez.
I was a trendsetter. I transcended it to my life when I got back to Boston too. That wasn't so cool. But up in the Bronx and down and but I was lucky. The bug didn't go into my lungs. It stopped just before, and but it was the sickest I've ever been. It's in some ways, let me frame it a little larger what you're saying, which is it's not just the people who are putting some of their anger your way. It's this horrific just not wanting to see what's in front of his eyes for the Trump administration. This will go down in the American history as the worst treatment of sick people in ever, probably. So it's a bigger problem, as of course they're not mad at you, but you're there. We're there. It must be a horrible job. I don't know what you others have experienced.
Yeah, so it's also nice to meet you. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be here with everyone today. So I just graduated from my residency in New York City in June. So I'm in my first year of fellowship. So I kind of experienced COVID from that perspective. And to your point, in Dr. Lincoln, I think to me there's like this microcosm and macrocosm of what we're dealing with in terms of humanity and medicine. And I think the macrocosm is the leadership overall that we're seeing from the previous administration or the outgoing administration, that when you would hear the things of, this post-truth world of not taking science and medicine and experts' word and understanding and kind of championing the idea that we live in a a world that accepts science and empiricism as what we should follow. And then you have us, the people that are trying to abide by science and the principles that we know of to help our patients, to help ourselves. And so then you're kind of stuck in this horrible, you can't do anything right in that setting. The microcosm of this humanity issue is something that so my background's in art, and I went to art school and did a postbac and came into medicine. So I always kind of felt like this imposter the whole time. And I was always kind of really flabbergasted to see what kind of went through and what was normalized in medicine, which I think was exemplified so well in the house of God. And that hasn't changed. And I think when you're put into those settings, everyone goes into medical school empathetic, wanting to help, wanting to do the best thing that they can. And you see those horrible graphs that they show you in your 4th year of med school where your empathy kind of bottoms out. And everyone said to themselves and their colleagues, I would never be that person. Yet when you're in a 20-hour shift and you're carrying a very sick load of 20 people and someone passes away, and instead of feeling that lost, your first sense is relief that that's one less thing to do. Yeah. You were broken as a human being. And so that's what I was also kind of noticing myself as I was going through that experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's no time off, right? You didn't get any time off. You were asked to do more with less. Yeah. And pay cuts, I
think everyone was struggling with what to do. I mean, we were at a loss of personnel, and so our program tried really hard to make it as humane as possible. But we were all just thrown into it. It was tough.
And it felt so great, right? When those people were clapping, and you felt that support. And imagine if we had a president who was clapping, and we felt it would feel different, right? Because you knew what you were doing was amazing work. It's just hard, the chronicity of this chronic disease that we're experiencing, and just to feel that now we are the bad guys, because it's still it's a different thing if you're asking us to do what we're doing and you're appreciating it, and it's hard. I mean, there are those patients who appreciate it and you're making a difference, but like you said, the empathy meter, it's just, I worry for my colleagues, and I worry especially for my colleagues in New York, the PTSD, what you guys had to do, now what's happening all over the country. I just worry so much about what this will do mentally for physicians.
I just had an idea that we should do a 4-way op-ed on we're the bad guys. Mm-hmm. I haven't really seen much written about that lately. Has there been? I'm serious. Mm-hmm. Somebody has to stand up, to explain what is going on in the inhumanity that flows down on us, not through anyone's fault except, the government, the lax government. So anyway, I'll throw that out there. It might be an interesting thing to do, because people have to know. They have to know. And
I think this built on a foundation where the physicians weren't seen as human from, this clearly in the 70s when you were writing your book, and clearly today before the pandemic came, the physicians, we just weren't treated as human beings with, again, thoughts, feelings, families, bodies, having to pee, having to eat, having to take breaks. And then you throw on the pandemic on top of it. And I think that it just exacerbated it. It was just kind of fuel on the fire. And I think that we can have the opportunity or utilize this as an opportunity to finally make change, because we do finally have the attention of the international world. Physicians are human too. We're tired too. We get sick too. More physicians I know this week are sick themselves with COVID than any other week in my own personal life. Like, it's just this second wave is really, as you mentioned, this past week starting to take people down, and we're preparing for the winter. But I think this is the time to start paying attention more and have an ear of people who maybe wouldn't have listened a year or two ago, if that makes sense. Because without us, we are the most valuable instrument in healthcare. Without us, there is no healthcare. So let's take care of our physicians and keep them here practicing medicine and saving people who need to be saved.
Well, as I say, that's a beautiful message. And, let's think about it, about trying to do something. The press is open to these things. And I haven't heard anybody writing about this. I mean, when I go out and talk, well, I used to go out and talk. When I go in and Zoom talk, when we come to this, I say, has anybody ever seen in a crowded theater when someone falls down on the stage, a cry go out to the audience? Is there an insurance executive in the room?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is what drives me crazy as an old 60s guy who did protest and it worked. But for a while anyway, is how have we lost the influence that we have? I mean, politically as well as in our systems. But we really have to figure out what to do about that. I don't know how you feel about that. I mean, how do you deal with feeling, I can't believe it. I mean, I can't believe it. I've been abused in emergency rooms and stuff in the usual way back when I worked there, but not like this. So, how do you deal with it? Or what can we do better?
I think some of like what Dr. Smith is saying, that, it's making you maybe realize some things. For me as an obstetrician, I didn't realize before how much I loved it when the older siblings would come onto the unit to meet their new babies. And it wasn't until they weren't there for a few months, I was like, oh man, I miss those little kids. I miss being able to hug a patient after a delivery. I miss being able to tell a woman when she has a stillbirth that she can actually see my face. It has made me realize just how amazing we are at connecting with our patients and their families. And we still do an amazing job even through all of the PPE. But it is making me appreciate, sometimes we joke, oh, there's 25 people in the room. I can't wait to get back to 25 people in the room. I just can't wait. And so I don't think I'll ever say that ever again.
Yeah.
I go back to the things that you said. It's the danger of isolation. It's all exactly the things that you said. They're just so much more heightened in this moment. The danger of isolation of physicians, the healing of good connection, the relational. And you said when we connect, you said if, for instance, for a lunch date, but I think in this space too, when physicians come together and connect, you said a power arises out of them that neither one of them nor any individual could have separately. But when we come together and share our truth, and then we say, okay, now we're together, and together we're more powerful than we ever could have been by ourselves.
Yeah.
I think it's so relevant right now, particularly.
Yeah. And there are lots of different kinds of isolation, and all are dangerous as far as I see it. Are any of you feeling like you get isolated more right now with all of this?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like in a way there was something very magical about being a physician in this time. Like, one, you're able to actually do some tangible good. You can actually help in this like crisis, which felt good to do so. Scary, like petrifying, but still good. But my friends who are not in medicine look at me and they say, kind of, feeling bad to say so, but admitting to me, you're lucky that you can leave your house and go to work. Like, you have that. And they feel very isolated in that setting. And so when I'm at work, I don't feel that isolation. I feel the isolation, kind of a little bit to what Dr. Lincoln was saying with my patients previously. I used to say that 90% of my day was spent behind a computer as a physician or as a resident, and 10% was at the bedside, which is like the reverse of what I expected it and wanted it to be. And so that 10% was me sitting, talking, unencumbered by PPE and so on. And now every time you're in a room, you feel like you have to race to get out as to not expose yourself or your patient. And so I think for me, that isolation still exists. But in terms of having the beauty of being able to go to work and be with my colleagues has been, I think, really helpful for me mentally, especially after what we've experienced.
Yeah.
I agree. As a mom of 2 kids, I see my work sometimes as an escape from being home with 2 rowdy kids. And I feel for the people who were like stuck home and could not leave. And that, you're tired when you're like, well, maybe I'll risk an exposure to COVID if it means I get to talk to some nurse friends and hang out. But we need connection. We need to be around other people. Yeah.
Is it? Yeah, I haven't been in this situation. Is it when you have those big masks and everything on, and do you feel connected to anybody then? Is it sort of walling you off like somebody, in one of those old diving bells that went down into the ocean? I mean, what's it like? I haven't been there.
It's extra static. It's all this extra static. I tell people it's like all this extra white noise that you have to work through. I don't know if you guys felt the same way, but I feel like I'm underwater.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we wear the respirator sometimes. Like during the height of COVID, I was wearing one of those respirators, so like no one could hear what you were saying, no one could see you. It was horrible, and it's scary too. I mean, you look like
Right.
Scary how?
I think it's one thing to be in the hospital, to be, you know, the patient, to be in the bed is scary in and of itself, and then to have every single provider who walks in that room gowned up to the nines as if you have, you know, as if something is like there's the humanity of it, just from like the sight, the touch, the tactile component is just totally stripped away from it. So from that perspective, I imagine it's quite scary.
Yeah.
I always wonder what the mothers feel like when I do a delivery and I hand them their baby, and their baby is the only one who doesn't have a mask on in the room. And I just feel so sad that this beautiful natural event is so medicalized even further, a hospital birth. And I worried, oh gosh, do they worry that their baby is too exposed? It's a strange way to do what I do every day.
Boy, that's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So
This is-
where? Oh,
Sorry about that, Shem. I decided to just hop on since there was a lull to maybe bring on a few questions so that you can answer them. Let me look through. So this was touched on in the other episodes, but I think that it's still a great question to ask, especially since we have different personalities on, and so maybe this will take us a different direction. So someone is asking, how do doctors come together? Would physician unions protect us?
I mean,
you're not going to get arrested for this, you know.
I think, I mean, again, since I'm still technically house staff and experiencing what I experienced in residency, which I think is a universal kind of issue, I think there should definitely be a union amongst house staff and residents and interns. I think there are some kind of pseudo unions that seem to happen in different places in different hospitals, but you know, it felt and still feels to some degree like an indentured servitude that is extremely archaic and not, I think, parallel to what we're trying to do, which is to try and train young physicians and trying to do the best care we can for our patients. And I think when anyone's working 28-hour shifts and 80+ hour weeks and barely getting paid, I don't think anyone wins out in that situation. So a union would give some bargaining power and some seat at the table to some degree.
Right.
It's hard to see your pay get cut when the nurses get extra hazard pay, and you're doing the same thing, and it's morally demoralizing because you've never taken a day off. And if anything, you've done more work, right, during this time with less. And a union would be a dream. We've talked about it, yeah. And I'm employed by a hospital.
Well, in man's fourth best hospital, I took on the whole system, you know, not just the internship. And so I at one point, the fat man who has the story is he brings his guys together again when he's been given a chance to do whatever he wants at man's fourth best hospital, because man's fourth best were very ashamed that they've fallen all the way to 4 from 1. So they bring in the fat man, and what he wants to do is to have a public clinic leaning up against this great big hospital, and he wants to show how to put the human back into medicine. So that was my task. And to do that about the systems, he gives a lecture to his group at in the middle of the book that's called The 6 Rackets of American Healthcare, Follow the Money. And for me to understand this, it took me 2 months to understand the 6 interweaving big things that are going on. This gets to the union business, but and then at the end, he gives a lecture on what to do about it. And one of the things he says, and we haven't talked about this really, he says basically the solution is to squeeze the money out of the machines. Squeeze the money out of the machines. That is, doctors, okay, deal with the data, but have a separate private system that if they want to get more money than whatever the national system will be, do it on their computers. And I think that would be a great change. And just quickly about doctors' union, I wrote about this 25 years ago, actually, but because we've given away our power. We've given away our power. People came in, like to Massachusetts, to manage care, and they said, if you don't join up with us, you're not going to have any patients. And, we should have said, I said, hey, what do you mean? I'm the doctor. I get the patients. You can't treat patients. No. Doctors elbowed each other out of the way to get into this thing that wound up destroying what we have. I think just quickly, the best example for unions are the nurses. I mean, they never lose a fight. Never lose a fight. And one of the things we have to do if we're going to get together is we have to connect with the nurses and the patients and other healthcare workers. That would be power. And I don't think it's out of the question.
So with that being said, there's actually two interesting things that I want to bring in. One is a comment that continues with the whole union idea. How do we strike? That's the power of a union. But, and this is clever, she says, our ethics get in the way of it and result in us being exploited. So what do you guys have to say to that? How do we build a union if we can't strike?
Mm-hmm. And that's why we haven't yet.
Well,
yeah.
So we do, as we've discussed, residents do have unions. Like where I went to residency did have a union. I went to an internship that didn't and a residency that did. And it was actually a huge difference. There was built-in backup. Like when my grandma died, I could actually leave, right? Because there was built-in backup, and that doesn't happen in most residencies. But as you become an attending, the idea of unions kind of goes out the window. And I think in medicine, we're trained, you go through all these systems, first year, second year, third year, fourth year of residency, et cetera. We're taught to comply. And then we sort of get this like learned helplessness where it's like, you have to do what they say. You're a cog in the wheel. And if you try to resist, it doesn't work. So burnout in a part is that, you don't perceive you have any more effectiveness, and it is a learned helplessness. So I think connecting with, as we talked about earlier, with other physicians and starting to plant a seed of belief that maybe your voice matters. Maybe you can make a change. Maybe right in your own office, maybe right in your own institution, maybe in your own state, maybe whatever the reach is that you have. For some people, it's all the way up to Congress, like with some of the speakers that you'll have on later in this series that have taken letters to Congress. But it's just believing that we can affect change and then taking action 100 times until 1 or 2 or 3 of them stick, and like not stopping and just going, okay, well, that didn't work. So I guess we're just going to have to do it the way they say. Does that make sense? Like if there's enough of us who believe we can change the system, then we will. And it has to come. It can't go on like this. Like it's just not possible for another 50 years or 20 years or whatever for it to continue going like this. It doesn't make sense.
It can't go on like this. And I'll just give you the example from nurses in Boston. Last year, the nurses were really needed more help. They needed, they were stretched thin at the Brigham Hospital, and they threatened to strike. The Brigham wouldn't do anything, and they brought in the mayor for the last day. The strike was going to be on a Monday, and he settled it on the Sunday. And the nurses went back to work with a better contract. And then in the Globe 3 days later, on the top space on the right on the front page, Brigham Hospital loses $24 million in preparation for the strike. I mean, you think that we don't have power? We do. We do. They can't afford. And if doctors ever got to that point, they couldn't last a day if a third of the doctors went out at a particular hospital.
But I think that's where the problem lies, right? In that we do have power, but then the patients won't get treated. And unfortunately, but fortunately for humanity, these are the people that go into medicine, or the people that won't strike just because we don't want the patients to not get treatment. So therein lies that, catch 22.
I don't want to monopolize this, but years ago, I wrote a thing called The Doctor's Strike in the Boston Globe. And basically, what I said is if you started early and said you were going to strike in 6 months or a year, unless you get this, you have a lot of doctors who just put their names on a piece of paper, there's nothing else. Yeah, you can put my name on this. Yeah, we're going to do this. As it gets closer and closer and closer, it would be such a disaster if any of us went off on strike. They would have to settle. I mean, they can't do it without us. They can do it with almost everyone else, even nurses, but not us.
All right, so to move on to something that's actually similar, I'm actually curious how Shem's going to answer it, and it was addressed to Shem, although I would love to hear the rest of the panel as well. And this comes from Sunny's group on Facebook. It's someone who asked, what do you think about the lost art of diagnosis in the era of corporate pressures to process high patient volumes and decreased value of expertise due to unsupervised practice of non-physician practitioners?
I put it, and value of expertise due to underserved.
Yeah, I think they're getting at the recent sort of issues with not, because there's such a shortage of medical doctors, they're bringing in nurses and such, like nurse practitioners and PAs. So I think there's now issues going on in medicine where physicians are feeling like that's compromising care. How do you feel about it, is what the person wanted to know.
This is what we haven't touched on yet, really, directly, except a little bit. Look, the reason when I went to NYU Med, when I got an invitation 5 years ago to NYU Med, they brought me in to teach the House of God, which was kind of nice because Harvard hated me for the House of God. I have a seminar on the House of God. And I had been out of medicine and I was going on rounds on the ward, and as clear as day, I saw what medicine was like now. And as Roy says, the same narrator in the new book, he says it was a time when medicine could go either one of two ways, either toward more humane patient care or money and screens, which we know is money and money. And that's what this book is about, right at its heart, because that's the prime cause of so much of what is hurting care and us. And I think almost everything else gets worse because of those things. We are under such pressure, or you guys now, and not, as you said, 10% with patients and 60 or 80% in front of a screen. It's crazy. It's crazy. And in terms of other physicians helpers and stuff, that's a symptom of what's going on. And so some nurse practitioners and all the other different things are good. That's all good, but the issue is far beyond that. It's really, I think, what I said. That's my idea, but others should chime in.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I hear two issues in that question. There's the lost art of diagnosis, which is, like I think of Abraham Verghese and Stanford, and the lost art of the physical exam and the touching the patient and the listening to the patient. And, people don't even sit people up to look at their backs or their rears or anything. And you miss huge things because we're looking at the eye patient, they call it, right? Abraham Verghese writes articles about the eye patient. You look at the patient in the computer and you make rounds at the computers instead of in front of the human being. Mm-hmm. Clearly in COVID right now, that there's a temporary reason for doing that. But I think the question had talked about, it's the pressure of the productivity, the pressure to go faster, the pressure to do all these things. And so we do lose, I think, that diagnostic and physical connection. Listen to the patient. He's telling you his diagnosis, right? And then there was the second part of the conversation that was about, and what about nurse practitioners and physician extenders that have much less experience but come in and, there's the concern about them taking over with less training and less information. So I think a two-part answer there. And then, of course, go ahead and speak to that as well, Mike or Dr. Natter.
Oh, please call me Mike. No, I think you nailed it. I also saw the two questions in there, and I agree. Like, we spent a painstaking long amount of time in medical school to learn the physical exam, the art of the exam, why it's important, why we still do the things we do. And then when you get the patient and you're overloaded and the hospital wants you to have this throughput, you just, pan scan the entire body and don't even put a stethoscope or lay a hand on the patient at this point. And the question is like, why is that? And I think you answered it. I think it's money. I think it's turning over beds. And to me, I always thought about this kind of from a broader perspective and like, why is that? What's the impetus to do that? And whenever you have a private institution, the purpose of these institutions is you're beholden to shareholders, to money, to the bottom line, which is good business. But when you're trying to help patients and train physicians, I don't think you can do that when you're beholden first and foremost to shareholders and to bottom lines. You need to be, worried about your patients and about your staff and your employees. So I think there's an inherent, disconnect in that model overall from like a large perspective. The other component of the nurse practitioners and the PAs, and so I see and work with a lot of them, and they're all very good people. They mean well, they're doing good jobs, but I think that there's a role for them. And I think that role has gotten artificially expanded again because of the bottom line to make more money. And I think that's where it becomes potentially dangerous. Not that they're not intelligent, not that they don't know what they're doing, but they're trained in a much more specific place. Whereas physicians, because of our residencies, because of the amount of time and because of the depth of information that we've had to dig into, we can think about things in a much more abstract way. So instead of kind of checking boxes and making sure that this CAP, pneumonia or whatever gets treated, if someone comes in more undifferentiated or more complicated, I think that's, should be to someone that had more training in, had more time to think about things from a different perspective.
Yeah, I would say on that last part of that second question, I think maybe it's unique because in obstetrics, we work with advanced practice practitioners all the time, like certified nurse midwives. And I think they're wonderful. And I think they're critical to providing good medical care for low risk women. So I think the question isn't, should they be allowed to? They're here. So be involved in their training and be involved in the boards that are, discussing what they can do and what they can't do. I've worked with some amazing ones, and when used appropriately, I think they're phenomenal, and they allow me to work to the fullest extent of my license and have such a relationship that they come to you so that when they aren't sure, you're able to work together in a team. I would much more rather put my energy into other things, such as here in Oregon, where naturopaths are reimbursed by insurance and designated as primary care providers. So maybe it's like my crazy Pacific Northwest thing, but I'll take a PA or somebody who has a doctorate in nursing any day. And I've seen them do wonderful things in my organizations. But if it's a separate issue with how they are replacing them financially as opposed to physicians, I think that's a separate issue. And I think we can all coexist, but we need to be involved in, for sure, in training and monitoring.
Yeah. How would you three feel? Would you feel any different if what you had to do in terms of documentation would be to say, for instance, if you did an appendectomy, none of you are surgeons, but if you did appendectomy, you type in the code for appendectomy and you have a system say that all across the country, an appendectomy is the same cost. So you click appendectomy. And then you look and see if there is, as I said before, a private insurance also, like Medicare supplement, which is great. I have it. It's great. It's terrific. I pay $100 a month or something, wait till you get old. I mean, it's great. And then you look up and see, does your patient have private insurance? Oh, yes, they have it. All right. You take your finger and you click again, and that all the data goes to the insurance company. And if they want to get paid more, do it on their computers. Do you think that would help? That's the VA model.
Mhm.
That's the VA model. Would it help? I'm sure, or not.
I'm not sure I totally understand your question, Shem, but if you're asking if we all got paid the same for a procedure nationally, so we didn't have to worry about all the billing and documentation, I would take it in a heartbeat because I hate thinking about that. That's why I'm hospital employed. I'd be the worst private practice physician ever.
No, I mean,
But,
if you have to put in, I mean, it's for data mostly. You put in the data of the operation and everything else like that. You have to do the things that are good for medicine, and then, but then you're not fighting the war across the screen with the insurance on the other side. You're not saying, like in sepsis or something, doing the worst all the time, the worst diagnosis, which is against the Hippocratic oath to lie, and they're trying to pay the least. That's gone. That's what I'm saying. Suppose you lifted the burden of screwing around with insurance. Wouldn't that help? It wouldn't be 80% in front of the screen, because that's not what takes up the time. The data and the treatment, diagnosis and treatment.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to actually wrap it up because we're running a little bit behind. So I actually want to thank the panelists for joining us. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Sunday to join both Shem and I in this really great series where we start to discuss things in a more public way. So without further ado, again, thank you. And we're going to now transition to a reading from Man's Fourth Best Hospital.
Man's Fourth Best Hospital comes about because, as I've said, I suddenly was thrust into modern medicine again. And it's a sequel to The House of God. And the Fat Man, as I said, brings back the usual guys that were in the House of God. And so when I got to NYU 5 years ago, I got a good look at what it's like to be a doctor now. And this is a short piece in the novel that talks about your visit to your doctor now. Your visit to your doctor has become satire. You walk in, lucky if you get eye contact, and sit across the desk. Your doctor is trapped, hunched behind a computer screen, back or shoulder to you. The doc asks a question. You answer. The keyboard goes click, click-de-click, faster and faster. On and on it goes, and you find yourself in the patient's dilemma. Do I keep talking or wait for a break in the action? Usually the next question. Is he or she still listening or not? The new definition of, quote, a good doctor, one who can contort his or her body to touch type while still making eye contact. As you keep waiting, two questions may enter your mind. What is he or she doing? What you don't know is that your doctor is sitting there in front of that screen seething because he is forced to sit in front of a screen seething instead of what he wants to do, to talk and listen and be your doctor. He spends 60% of every workday, at least 6 hours in front of that screen. Family doctors spend an additional 3 hours at night. This is the doctor's dilemma. Why is he or she doing this? You might think she's doing this because it will be better for your health care. It may not be. It may even be worse. Worse for your care, and for sure, worse for the care of your doctor. It is only better for the money, the health care industry. The machine, you see, was not primarily designed for care, but for billing, to make as much money as possible. We doctors are caught in this mess. We're not only treating the patient, we're treating the screen. And it's not that your doctor wants to turn his or her back to you. It's the healthcare industry that has turned its back on both you and your doctor. So this is a novel not just for doctors. It's a novel for doctors and patients and anyone else. And I hope it has an effect, especially with the new administration coming in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shem. And with this, we close yet another episode. I'm going to take you off the stage. So, again, thank you. And to everybody watching at home, please join in next Sunday at the same time, at the same place at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will have Shem back again and a brand new physician panel to discuss with us putting the human back into medicine. Here's a little promo for next week's guests.